Good afternoon through the prayers of Holy Fathers of Jesus Christ, our God, of mercy in us and save us. Today we are reviewing a book, which I will get to right after we start the intro.
If you take a look, believe it or not, there are millions of true Orthodox all over the world who are confessing the faith. They're teaching the Orthodox faith you thought you learned. So for 90% of you listening to this podcast, you didn't know who I was, but you did believe in the seven councils, right? You don't believe that the fourth council or the fifth council is up for debate or discussion? You don't believe David Bentley Hart isn't a heretic? You think he might be one? Become true Orthodox. You've made it this far, and we invite you to do so. Thank you.
Hello again. We're gonna work on the music because I'm still not sure the 1812 overture is what we're going for here. Today we're reviewing a book. It's this book, which, while we're not supposed to judge books by their cover, it is a nice cover. So, The Rise and Fall of the Papacy by Patrick Craig Truglia. He has been on the show before. He's even got a comment in the chat here. Hold on. Let me just remove the intro. I'm still getting used to doing intros, guys. Okay, so we got yes, we're live today. Hello. And yes, well, I didn't design it. DTC did. Really beautiful job. I love the visuals. Not sure about the music. That kind of started as a joke. But let's get right to the review. So, first off, some things you should know. After this review is done, if you are interested in the book, the link is in the description. It was not what I expected. It is a very different book than what I expected. I kind of wasn't sure whether it was going to be polemical or it was going to be analytical. It turned out to be a very, very detailed study, which, frankly, I can only think of one book that even comes close to the kind of to the description. And I'll get to that in a little bit because they're not the same book. But in terms of the first thing we have to ask is, as always, is the book necessary? And the truth of the matter is, in this particular case, I would say yes. There has been no recent detailed history of the Orthodox papacy in English. It's the Pope is, in most Orthodox histories, relegated to a footnote with a few exceptions. St. Gregory the Great, of course, St. Leo. Whereas this book, and you see, kind of like when you read it, like you read the title, The Rise and Fall of the Papacy, it kind of feels a little bit kind of like there's going to be a narrative chain, and that's not exactly what the book does. I don't want to get too detailed because you can always buy the book, and I've made notes along the way. I've actually read the entire book with care. That's part of the reason why I haven't done the Ivan Ilyin review yet, because I have not read half of that book. But with this, I did finish it. It was really hard for me to put down. First off, so I will give Patrick props for the writing style. It's very approachable, while it is high-level stuff at times, especially around the 8th century chapter, which I'm going to get to. The book is divided primarily into epochs or centuries. So, in other words, the introduction, first off, could be its own work. It's fantastic. I can honestly say it is one of the it's a really good essay on its own. Like, a lot of the chapters could really fit that, but the introduction it's phenomenal. It, basically it makes it's basically it's weird because I know that Patrick Truglia, he could be watching this stream, and I almost simply want to refer to him as the author like Truglia, but I feel like that's disrespectful. But at the same time, it seems weird to first name it. Okay. Anyway, the author actually begins by opening the question of how we view the papacy historically and in context. And so, one of the things that is evident throughout the book is that it uses a perspective shift that you're not used to. And what I mean by that is that most books, when you read about Orthodoxy and the papacy, you will read about the Eastern Church, you will read about the papacy usually as a stand-in for the Western Church. And it's one of the two is going to be grafted on. This is a completely different paradigm. This operates under the assumption that the papacy properly was part of the Orthodox paradigm altogether, and that the West and the East were both operating on a consensus basis, which is the way we're supposed to do things, even with apologetics, with the consensus of the fathers. So right off the bat, it starts by saying, it starts with this whole, let's just throw your old expectations out of the water, because that's not what this book's going to be. And so I was excited by the time I finished the introductions. I was like, really, where's this going to go? Where it went surprised me. Every chapter, up until the last one, is a description of what was happening in regards to the Orthodox papacy vis-a-vis other patriarchates every century. So chapter 1 is for the first century, chapter 2 is for the second century, chapter 3 is for the... And there's a lot of detail. There is a lot of detail, and I'm going to go through some of this. And so some comments that I have on each of the chapters as we go through it. So obviously, when we get to chapter 1, which is referred to as the first century of the papacy, nice little picture of Peter and Paul there. Excuse me. The question of Peter is absolutely the right track. Many of the assumptions in the texts are confirmed by pre-schismatic liturgical Western documents. In the first chapter, there's a lot of discussion with oh, hello there, Gene and the other Paul have shown up. If you're okay, we're up to chapter 1, so you're early. So, but in any case, the point is, one of the things that it touches on is that the earliest fathers usually make reference to Rome and Peter and so on and so forth. And you'll find, and this is something that I just wanted to add on, is that if you look in Western liturgical documents like Episcopal ordinance, for example, they refer to the lifting of bishops, the elevation of bishops, as being a Petrine office itself. So yeah, the handing of the education is something that you will see in pre-schismatic Western rites for things like even baptisms, but it goes up to ordinations where each time the bishop will hand something. For example, there's the handing of the catechesis, which is literally, usually a handing of the gospel text, and the handing of different types of liturgical items at each of the minor orders, elevations, etc. So it's even though he does not document any of the stuff I'm mentioning here, the stuff that he does document in terms of the Western and Apostolic Fathers is absolutely on track. So it's a great foundation to start with. Around chapter 3, I'm going to explain the only book I can really compare this to. So I've got a little while to go, but we're going to get to chapter 2. One of the things, and I don't want to give too many spoilers out, but there was a lot of discussion in chapter 2 about the association of churches with relics. And there's, a question on St. Hippolytus. Was he an anti-pope? Was he like a core bishop, etc.? These are things that are touched upon. And they are important to the second, century of church history. And so then there's once we get to chapter 3, there's an even more, it's much more detail on the case of St. Hippolytus. One thing I will say is, if you're a big fan of the footnotes and following down those rabbit holes, there's a lot of footnotes here. Like, I do not know how much time that Patrick worked on this, but I get the impression it was a lot of reading he was doing. And so it's fantastic. The one thing that I will say, and there's a couple of minor quibbles I have with the third chapter. There's kind of the implication that concubinage was sort of tolerated. I don't know that that's necessarily true. I think that was actually within the law of Justinian, or the Roman law before that, before it was codified by Saint Justinian. But the point is, it was in Roman law. So I don't know how much of that is the church tolerating it and how much of it is the secular state. There was one other thing which confused me, but I think it may just be a minor issue of language. The third chapter does mention an overriding principle that only patriarchs may depose patriarchs. Now, I know later in the book that actually is refuted by example, so I think it was just it might have just been more of a kind of like a style of phrase issue. But it made me raise my eyebrows when I was getting through chapter 3. Chapter 4 does bring that up. Instead, there is the question of the plenary versus the ecumenical council. What kind of council has authority, and the what are the ramifications of of the nature of the ecumenical council, how we determine it, whether it's real or not. Questions that are even being asked today, but it approaches it from the perspective of trying to see what the fathers in every one of these centuries was saying. So definitely, I think that once you get to the first 4 chapters, you already have a basic kind of grasp of where he's going with it. Once we get to the 5th and 6th centuries, we're kind of getting into what we know as the established papacy. Saint Leo, so on and so forth. So we are kind of getting into the weeds of what most people would call the standard papal arguments. And so, he deals with the disputed passages, putting them in historical context, so that you kind of don't get misled by the techniques that, frankly, papal apologists often use. And it's at this point I'm going to pause, and I'm going to say what this book reminds me the most of, even though it's clearly meant to be a scholarly work, and it is. It reminds me the most, and it's not a similarity thing in the normal sense. I'm talking about how it will be perceived by a Roman Catholic audience and by an Orthodox audience. Yes, I haven't decided yet. That's why I haven't said anything. Okay, but here's what I would say. The book it reminded me the most of is Father Vladimir's The Papacy. And what I mean by that, because it's not a similar book in any way, Father Vladimir does follow the narrative structure of going through the centuries of the papacy. And when we're talking about the papacy, we're obviously talking about the schismatic papacy, which was the first of the 3 volumes. However, the big problem that I think the author is going to encounter is not among Orthodox. I think every Orthodox probably should own a copy of this book, only because nothing of its kind actually exists, and it's necessary. You do need it to understand the history of the West in an Orthodox paradigm. I put that up there with what was that book? The one that was done by Father Seraphim Rose on the Western Saints, because he includes like 70 pages worth of detail on their practices. That's Vita Patrum, and so there are other editions, but Father Seraphim's editions make a big difference. In this case, what we're talking about is a historical background for the papacy in the first. Really, it's the first 9 centuries in the book, and I'll explain that in a little bit. But ultimately, I think every Orthodox should have it, and you'd love it. It's very readable. But if your target audience is a Roman Catholic, they will despise this book in much the same way they despise the papacy. And what I mean by that is, the first time I read the papacy, I was horrified. It produces a feeling. because papism is based around the person of the Pope, there is that sort of personal attachment. By contrast, this book is very detached, whereas in some ways you could say that Abacute's book seemed hostile. But ironically, Father Vladimir, when he was Abacute, was Roman Catholic when he wrote the book. You see, he wasn't trying to attack Roman Catholicism, he was trying to lay out facts. In that sense, the author has laid out lots and lots of facts. And if you are a Roman Catholic, you'll be horrified, like really legitimately horrified. You're going to think this book is, it's evil, but it is so filled with information. It's insane how filled with information it is. I did not realize I was going to enjoy the book as much as I did. It's a very easy to read style. It covers things in a very comprehensive way. And as I mentioned, it's like footnote city. Like it's just, there's a footnote for everything. There's nothing unsourced in this book. So it's very difficult to disagree with the author's conclusions. It is extremely definitive. If you're looking for a book that will give you the definitive why you shouldn't be a Roman Catholic thing, ironically, this is it, even though it doesn't make that argument. It simply makes the argument that the papacy in an Orthodox context makes total sense. And so the big stumbling block for, as I said, most people who are afraid to leave for Orthodoxy is the Pope. But once you see the description of the Pope in this book, as it's written throughout the centuries, you realize whatever they have in Roman Catholicism is not the papacy as we know it, which is going to get to one of the things I'm going to talk about. Because once we're talking about the imperial papacy, etc., it goes through that. It goes through the Byzantine papacy. It goes through, eventually the Lombardian and Frankish takeovers, covers that. I would say that at first I thought this, because I'll be honest, I skipped ahead. I skipped ahead when I first read it. I kind of skipped to the end because, if you all know me, you all know the videos that we've done on who invented the Roman Catholic Church. And I thought, how much is this going to be included in kind of this book? It's not. And I'm going to get to that. It's given lip service, which when I first looked at it, I kind of skipped to the end and I didn't understand the book. So then I was like, doesn't even talk about what we talk about. But there's a good reason. The book continues to go through, obviously all the way to the iconoclast period. We're talking then the 7th and the 8th century. By the time we get to the 8th century, however, it gets to a great level of detail. And we get to, the 8th century of the papacy. At that point, I kind of feel, and I may be wrong, but I kind of feel like that might have been the author's favorite chapter. And I'll tell you why. Because there is a lot of textual criticism around two particular passages which are used in the often in Roman Catholic and Orthodox apologetics discourse, specifically the letters received by the Council of Nicaea, being Adrian the First letter to the emperors and his letter to Tarasius. A considerable amount of time is spent talking about the textual differences between manuscript versions, etc., which, if you're like a big fan of that sort of thing, it's there. It's totally there. But it doesn't feel like the rest of the book, which is very strange. I feel like it was almost like meant to be its own essay, and then kind of like the book was then written after it, and so it feels very different from the other chapters, because the other chapters are a relatively smooth narrative, and here it's like, okay, in the middle of the 8th century, all of a sudden it's like, we got to really talk about these documents. And I mean, it was interesting and good to know, and it does provide a handy apologetical resource. Does it flow with the rest of the book? Not exactly. It's still a good chapter. It just doesn't flow with the rest of the book. But this is where I get kind of surprised, because after that, it goes to the 9th to 11th centuries of the papacy, which is what I had skipped to the end to. What I didn't realize was that in the first 8 chapters of the book, there's considerable attention to detail. By contrast, by the 9th to 11th chapters, it speeds through events really, really rapidly, a little too rapidly, which is kind of why my thinking as I read, because again, it goes back to that, my thinking in the whole who invented the Roman Catholic Church. The book doesn't really answer the question, nor do I think, after finishing it, do I think should it. I think this is a fantastic foundation to then continue on to discuss the history in the 10th, in the 11th and 10th and 11th centuries, because you could literally write a book with all the data that you have. After reading this, you could then go and research the data and actually write a book called Who Invented the Roman Catholic Church, because the book ends in the late 9th century. So basically, it doesn't even address the pornocracy. It doesn't address Rome's ultimate decline, which occurred in the 10th century, and then they tried to fix it. It touches upon that very briefly, but it's not the purpose of the book. So all of which frankly deserve their own book, because of all the political infighting, all the political indolence, all the craziness that surrounded the creation of the Roman Catholic Church. They wouldn't make sense here, because this is covering a fairly unified history. And what you see in the period of the pornocracy, the 10th century, up to the family, the Crescenti, and the other families running Rome, is a state of ecclesiastical chaos that even horrified people in the West. There were various Western bishops, etc., at the time who advised their own people that were making pilgrimage to Rome not to go there. That's how in disrepute Rome was before the beginning of the kind of the papal war that led to the Roman Catholic Church, which we now call the investiture controversy. The book barely touches that. And at first I thought that was a flaw. Now I think that's a feature. Because of the fact that what it does cover, which is a massive amount of time, you're talking from the founding of the church to around the year 900 or so, that it covers carefully. It is an incredibly complete work. And I think that, honestly, to cover the period after 900, the pornocracy, and ultimately the investiture controversy, requires a book on its own. And I can tell you the title for that book should probably be Who Invented the Roman Catholic Church. And while I don't think that the author would probably want to be the one to write it, he's definitely proven he can. And that, frankly, he wrote a very worthy book for an Orthodox understanding of the papacy. In that sense, I have nothing but recommendation for it. I highly suggest that if you are not familiar with the Orthodox papacy as a Western Christian, as a Western and Orthodox Christian, if you're an Orthodox person who wants to understand what the papacy really was in Orthodoxy, get this book, because it will cover all of the major stuff. It will cover apologetical examples that Roman Catholics now use and why they are completely using anachronism and why they're incorrect. But it's not the purpose of the book. The overarching narrative is a history of the Orthodox papacy. And on that, I've never seen anything like it. And it's fantastic. So yeah, 5 out of 5, completely recommend. Go click the link, go press it and buy it. Unless you have questions for me, which of course, as we are now hitting live discussion after review, we done with the review. So if anyone has questions, comments, etc., or you want to know more about the book, or you have any questions about it, let me know. I'm also opening the floor to invitations if you want to jump on the stream. If you have questions, I will deal with it. This is kind of what we're talking about today, so I'll take other questions, but I don't want it to be a free-for-all like our Sunday show. I'd really like this to be kind of more about the book. Yeah, congratulations, 5 out of 5. It is a fantastic book if you have not bought it yet. I was lucky. It was donated to me, and I really appreciate it. Thank you very much. prayers for that. But I definitely, it's fantastic. I cannot emphasize this enough. So in the chat, I have now put in the call-in link if anyone wants to call in with questions about the book or ideas or thoughts. And if not, we're going to do that whole mighty 15-minute thing where if, no one shows up in 15 minutes or I don't have any questions to answer, we'll call it a day. So, favorite chapter and why? Ooh, that's tough. That is tough. I'm going to tell you, on the one hand, I like the introduction is amazing because it shatters all of your previous presuppositions about what the book is supposed to be about, what the papacy is supposed to be about, etc. But then that closing chapter where you're running for 200 years at light speed. Oh, hey, it's the other Paul. How's it going? Hold on, let me finish answering the question. So yeah, the final chapter is one that everything moves at breakneck speed, which is really cool and kind of, I think, sets up for a second book. But I guess my favorite chapter would probably be probably chapter 3. It was interesting. I'd say chapters 3 and 4. But yeah, for me, it goes introduction because it is its own essay, final chapter, and chapter 3. And then the other ones are all really high quality, so I like them. So, comments, questions. I see you have a copy of the book as well.
That's right, Father. Right here with me. I have to concur with your review. It's a very, very top tier work.
Yeah, in that sense, I know that you have a lot of experience with, dealing with things like the Apostolic Fathers, etc., and early Church Fathers. But have you ever? Did it sound like? I would say that it probably best delineated an Orthodox conception of the papacy very, very clearly. And it's so clearly that if you're not used to what the Orthodox conception of the papacy is, or orthodoxy, it still shines through in the book.
Yeah, I even think it's so funny, even for me as an Anglican reading the book, I keep seeing myself going, yes, amen, yeah, preacher, this is awesome. This is great.
It's well done.
Yeah, conciliarism, let's go. Hey, that's the way. Yeah. And
he makes that argument from beginning to end, and by coming in strong at that beginning, it all kind of it paces the book. It's fantastic.
So what I wanted to comment is actually funnily enough for the question, my favorite chapter I think actually is the introduction. Believe it or not,
I agree.
Because of the one out of all the fantastic work that Craig does in his book, I disagree with a couple of his takes, like his interpretation of the Quarter-Testament controversy. But be that as it may, as excellent as the book is, I think actually its number one contribution that really sets it apart from everything else and really advances things well is its total reframing of the question. Because as he comments, it's like you have your pro-papal versus your anti-papal books from the different sides, and they're all around the framing of, in this time, was it either a fully developed papacy or was it only like a very partially developed papacy? It wasn't Vatican I. It was developing.
And this is totally different.
He rejects the entire paradigm. He just says, no, it wasn't. There wasn't a thing in the early church of a fetal developing papacy, and it wasn't complete. No. There was a complete self-sustaining system there. It just wasn't papal. That reframing alone absolutely it levels everything. It suddenly makes it's kind of like, to get needlessly complicated, it's kind of like with special relativity, where the ordering and sequencing of events actually depends on your reference frame in space-time. Rather than just staying in the same reference frame, he just completely shifts it, and with that, the whole preponderance of evidence just changes with it. Suddenly, evidence that's kind of half decent suddenly becomes really, really good because of that reframing. I think
evidence that previously looked half decent now looks terrible in time.
For the papal side, yeah, exactly. Because now you have the framing of, well, no, it's a complete system, so yeah, we're fine with that. It's just not Vatican I.
Yeah, and that is I think the beauty of the text. I think the question of Hildebrandianism, the investiture controversy, etc., they do need to be asked, but it wasn't for this book because it's a completely different historical era and deserves its own treatment, which we've covered on video, but obviously not in text. Okay, other thoughts on the book? Or
well, I loved how, unlike most other, because it is academic in tone and quality, but unlike most quote
but it's
unquote
readable.
it's
very
readable. Exactly like old school academic works, like from centuries ago. They didn't speak in like in academies or whatever it is. But also the balance. I always look for the balance in historical books of how much they cite primary versus secondary sources. And in this book, it's way more on the primary end, which I'm super happy about, because most secondary scholarly texts they'll cite, see author Janus von Niervorne in his Der Sprechen, and it's like, who cares? Show me the primary sources.
Well, what I thought was really interesting in this particular book, and that's in chapter 8, when he's going over, he actually goes over the scholarly consensus on page 286 and 287. And so he's like, some scholars say this, and some scholars say this. He then proceeds to list the people on each side, and we get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 8K. And then he goes through each of the sources, which means he's reviewed them to see their side. And then he flips on to the other side and counts that 1, 2, 3, 4, it looks like. So he just literally finds all of the scholars just in case you don't believe him. Just like, well, here's this position and here's this position.
True
that sort of attention to detail is not common in a lot of Orthodox literature, and certainly not Orthodox literature on the papacy. So this is absolutely a welcome text, and definitely, I would say it's a must-have. So definitely. All right. Well, in that case, thank you for being on and sharing your thoughts and review, the other Paul, and have a great rest of your day.
You too. God bless, Father. Take
care. God bless you. And so, again, you can jump in right now, call in live, and that is, it's if you want to make a comment or if you have a question about the book. But I don't see any other questions. I did answer Andrew's question there. So we'll give it another 5 minutes or so. And if there's no one else there, just, to jump in with their own questions and comments, we will cut it. We'll cut it to leave it at that. But yeah, definitely really appreciate that comment. Again, we are reviewing The Rise and Fall of the Papacy, which you can pick up from Amazon if you haven't yet already. It is definitely worthwhile. It is I would say, a paradigm shifting book. And it's, very, just for that, I highly recommend it. It definitely will not only up your knowledge of the papacy, but it will also up your apologetics game when talking to Roman Catholics, because the position, it will also strengthen your position because you'll have an orthodox understanding of the papacy itself, which is absolutely worth it. So that's seems like there aren't any more questions. As always, we do rely on our viewers and our listeners and our readers for support. So if you can, we also do have listings for donations. It is, it's always, it's been getting a little bit tighter these days, but we're trying to get more stuff done and complete more to get people to orthodoxy. In this, I will say this book has been a great service to that. So definitely, you should pick that up. But you should definitely give that an order. And again, if you want to support the channel, help us out. Hopefully soon I'll have a closing video as well as an opening one. And again, thank you very much and have a great day. God bless. Through the first holy fathers of Jesus Christ, our God, have mercy on us and save us. Amen.